Mission. I will now call roll. Sandy Rowe,
Here.
Greg Heyman,
Present.
Rukaya Adams, Natalie Arnott, Rachel Biscoe, Richard Devlin,
Present.
Arnell Fajardo,
Present.
Evelyn Coker,
Present.
Teresa Martinez,
Present.
Ben Proctor Andrews,
Here.
Mary Middleton,
Here.
Emily Simnett,
Present.
Moto Thomasapelli, Jennifer Smith,
Here.
Gail Yamasaki.
Here.
That is roll, Madam Chair, and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of items to bring to your attention before we wade into the full agenda. The first thing, I just feel the need to acknowledge the difficult times we are in terms of public discourse and politics and policies, and the anxiety that necessarily produces. So I'm not going to wade into the politics of it or the policies. The plain truth right now is that it's just impossible to predict what of everything that is being said and everything that is being reported will actually come to pass, or how significant the impact will be on higher education. All we can do at this point is to hold fast and do what we do our work. But I did want to call your attention to two notes from Ben in the last couple of weeks. The first one we were copied on, it was the 29th of January, to the president's diversity officers and others at our colleges and universities. And in this, I thought Ben emphasized with a great deal of grace and clarity that equitable access and success are woven into the policies, programs, and practices that we already have. They're not added on, they're not part of it, they are firmly woven into it. It's who we are, and we don't expect any of that to change. We're driven by our goals, been emphasized, and we're going to operate as usual in every way we can. He followed that up on the 5th of February with a letter to staff. And in this, it was just it repeated some of what he had said to the presidents, but it was also very reassuring, and noted how closely he and others are monitoring the changes or potential changes from Washington. And that as of now, as I said, we have not changed any policies, practices, or communications. And that when and if any guidance from the federal government is available, HECC will work closely, of course, with Oregon Department of Justice and with the governor's office to see how to interpret it and what, if anything, we need to do. And he, of course, promised the staff complete transparency and swift and clear communication, as well as some gatherings of the staff for support. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge those, thank Ben very much for that calm, steady hand and wisdom that he has and that he shares with all of us. It is always appreciated, but especially now in these difficult times. So thank you, Ben. I see a lot of head nodding too, so I know I'm not alone in that. I also wanted to call your attention to two very recent newspaper articles, one in the Oregonian and one in the New York Times. I think Ben sent you the New York Times one, that reported on state-by-state test scores in reading and math for 4th and 8th graders. This report that comes out, I think, every couple of years is called the Nation's Report Card. Because of the timing of these tests, this particular one has been widely interpreted as indicating how well states recovered from COVID school closures and other changes. As you saw in this, Oregon's performance is headed absolutely in the wrong direction. This is a change for Oregon. Not very many years ago, we would be middle of the pack of the states in terms of how our 4th and 8th graders did. So to be at the very bottom in the bottom couple is new to us and is very disappointing. I want to emphasize, I'm not calling this to your attention in any way to criticize our colleagues who are doing their very best and dedicating their talents to secondary education, but to emphasize that the struggle to prepare students for post-secondary education and for life is all of our struggle. It is really, really difficult. And we face some particularly difficult circumstances in Oregon. We have seen, fortunately, on our level at the post-secondary, very good progress in graduation rates. But that does not mean that we are reaching and able to educate successfully and have all citizens who could benefit from post-secondary education and training, that we actually have the doors open for them in a way that they can be successful. So I just call it to your attention because we need to pay attention to higher education broadly and holistically. And I was slightly encouraged to see in the Oregonian story, there was a slight mention of this having the attention, the results on this test having the attention of the legislature and of the governor. So perhaps there are changes in approach that they are considering and that can be made. But that's all. Any questions on either of those things before I move on? Thank you. Okay, for the agenda, just a brief review. You see that we have reports on the Oregon Opportunity Grant, on Oregon Promise, on Oregon Education Resources. It's always interesting and helpful to have these three grouped together because they all relate to each other and what we are doing to make post-secondary education affordable and accessible for all. We also have evaluation summaries for University of Oregon, OSU, and PSU, in addition to some other items. So that's the highlights of our agenda. And Guthrie, let's go ahead with the minute approval, if that's okay. Or no, that's not you, that's me. Okay. Looking back at our December minutes, are there any questions about it or corrections? If not, can I have a motion to approve, please?
Move to approve?
And a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye or raise your
Aye.
hand. Aye.
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 Thank you very much. Okay, Ben, I think you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Rowe. Can you all hear me? Great. Well, your opening remarks mean that I'll probably take a little less time with my own because you certainly covered some of the ground that I wanted to, with respect to the current landscape, particularly what we've observed and experienced at the federal level. And as you noted and summarized from those emails, obviously it is the case that HECC staff leadership is monitoring very closely the directives and decisions coming from the new presidential administration, and we're prepared or will respond as required by law to directives that apply to us. And in the meantime, again, as you noted, the message largely is that we're keeping our heads down and carrying on with the work. Again, just to retread a little bit of that territory, Chair Rowe, for HECC, from the outset of our existence, that work has focused very much on the success of all Oregonians, with a particular focus on those who have been underrepresented in post-secondary education. We recognize, this commission has recognized since the outset, that to meet the state's goals for economic development, for statewide educational attainment, will require paying particular attention to groups, including people of color, low income, rural Oregonians, whom our systems have left behind historically. And we've expressed that commitment through policies and funding strategies that are deeply embedded, not only in the HECC practice, and policies and rules, but also in state law through laws like tuition equity, the cultural competency requirements, other initiatives, now legal structures in Oregon designed to protect the ability and support the ability of all Oregonians to access and succeed in post-secondary education and training. Let me just say, a few words more about this topic. We have there's something of a habit in this country of seeing DEI as something that appeared newly in around 2020. Obviously, that's not the case for the HECC. It's really not the case for public higher education. While the words or that acronym may be a relatively new one, public higher education throughout the 20th century and really going back even before has had within it a mission of expanding opportunity. And that began, I think, of my grandmother, who was the first woman in my family, of which I'm aware, to attend a college in the early 20th century, a college in New York that the legislature there created for the education of women, right, under a view that expanding educational opportunity, post-secondary educational opportunity at that time meant expanding to women who had not had many opportunities to access higher education. Similarly, the returning GIs, the veteran support that this through the GI Bill that this country created in an effort to expand access and opportunity for Americans to higher education. The Pell Grant, with its focus on creating access for low-income students. Historically Black colleges and universities and their longstanding support from the state and federal governments. More recently, Hispanic serving institutions and their support. Again, part of this movement to create opportunity within higher education for all Americans, all Oregonians. So our work today, some of which carries that label DEI, carries on that legacy, right, of expanding educational opportunity for all Oregonians. I do want to acknowledge, in terms of the direct impacts, the brief federal funding freeze a couple of weeks ago did have a temporary impact on the HECC. Like many agencies and organizations that receive federal fund, we're in the habit of daily or weekly requesting funds from the federal government for grants that we have and that we administer on their behalf. That was temporarily affected to the tune of about $3.1 million of HECC funding for Title I WIOA workforce development activities and support for our AmeriCorps program that was delayed. Eventually, the payment systems caught up and those requests were fulfilled. So as of at least yesterday, we're back on track with our expected federal draws, but it did have that at least short-term disruptive impact. Those disruptions do have impacts then on our grant recipients, the local workforce boards and their sub-grantees whose payroll and other supports for workforce development depend on regular access to those funds. So certainly something that we'll be watching going forward. So again, we're monitoring, we're doing what we have to do, and we're continuing on with the work and commitment to this commission's priorities, its values, its equity lens, its strategic plan, and the state and federal law. Let me say a few words about your recently adopted strategic plan. You'll note that today's agenda does not include an update on strategic planning implementation. I want to spend just a moment on that and then largely to preview what you'll get in April. Since the adoption of your plan, and as I noted at our commission meeting in December, we have set up 9 sort of working groups within the agency. These are staff groups that are taking on 9 of the 18 strategies that are on that right-handmost column of your strategic plan. They are developing implementation plans for eventually for review by the executive committee or the executive team of the agency, as well as presented to you, the commission. So at your April meeting, what you'll see is in sort of short form is a summary of the planning that we're doing, led by these staff teams for taking sort of the next steps in implementing 9 of those 18 strategies. We've identified for each of the 5 goal areas an executive team sponsor who's helping support and lead those teams, and they'll be also presenting, or will be presenting a proposal for the outcome measures that will be associated with each of those goals. So you'll recall from the strategic plan, we had some discussion, but not a lot, about measurement of our progress towards those goals. And there's a column in that strategic plan where we've nodded towards the type of indicators that would help us to understand if we're on track for meeting the goals. We've asked our goal sponsors, staff leads, to work with our research and data team to more clearly define the measures that we'll use to know whether we're making progress towards those goals. So that, along with these initial implementation plans, will be presented to you in April. I'll note, I think we're in a transition in terms of our commission meeting agendas. I took a small step with the chair and vice chair's approval, a small step with today's agenda to transition to a new structure, or at least a new format that would reflect the relationship between our agenda and our strategic plan. So you'll see for several of the items today, you'll see the goal area that it is associated with, goals drawn from your strategic plan. We'll see how this feels, and then we'll do some further work. I'll do some further work with the chair and vice chair to consider how we may further organize our agendas around the strategic plan and really help to secure that relationship. You will hear later this morning from Kyle Thomas, our Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs, on the legislative session report. One thing I'll note is that many of our staff are very much in the midst of developing slides and other materials associated with our budget presentation to the Ways and Means Committee, actually subcommittee of a Ways and Means Committee of the legislature, that is likely to begin at the end of March and run over several weeks. So I'll lead that, be joined by several other HECC staff, and presenting over a number of days of committee hearings the governor's recommended budget for the HECC and for post-secondary education and training in Oregon. It's also the most comprehensive presentation of who the HECC is and what we do. And it's hundreds of slides, it's multiple days of presentation, organized around our budget, but with a real attempt to help legislators understand broadly the circumstances, the context, the structure and design, the goals and values and strategies associated with, and programs associated with Oregon higher education and workforce development. Also at our April meeting, by which point most of our presentation likely will have been completed, I will give you a sort of very short version, a Cliff Notes version of that presentation, really probably with a particular focus on the opening day of that presentation, and show you some of those slides. But they'll all be available to you, and we'll send out those links when we've when we have them posted through the legislative website. I think that's the bulk of my report, Madam Chair. Finally, we'll note that your packet includes our routine budget tracking updates for spending in the current biennium relative to our budget. You'll see we are now in the final quarter of the two-year budget period. We are on track to stay within budget for all of our fund types. If you have questions about the information that you see on either of those budget reports, please don't hesitate to ask me, and if necessary, I'll follow up with the team. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ben. Any questions for Ben? Sarah Foster, I saw you earlier. Sarah Foster's here from the
I am
governor's
here.
office to give us a report and an update. Thank you, Sarah, for being here with us.
Absolutely. And can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I think we had a weather update earlier. I'm in Central Oregon, have like a foot of snow, and we lost power. Now it's back on. So
Well,
we're all hanging in there. So appreciate the invite. And I know Chair Rowe, just appreciate your comments at the beginning of the meeting. I'm probably gonna spend a lot of the time reaffirming really where the governor is at in terms of the federal transition. and just our commitment to, I know I mentioned this back in November, December, but just our commitment to working in transparency with y'all and transparency with Ben and in coordination with the HECC leadership to both ensure we're tracking any potential impacts, but also coordinating on a response. So I'm sure you've heard this in various forums, but we'll just share that, on January 27th, which many of us feels like a year ago, but was just a couple of weeks ago, the Office of Management and Budget sent out an internal memo instructing federal agencies to or those that receive federal funding to temporarily pause activities related to disbursement of federal financial assistance. And then on January 29th, the federal government rescinded the freeze. However, we continue to remain focused on assessing the impacts to our systems as a result of that temporary shutoff. And we also, I just want to reiterate, remain committed to upholding and honoring our government-to-government relationship with the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. Federal funds help the most vulnerable Oregonians, and withholding these funds is an abandonment of the federal government's duty to protect Americans, and it is happening in states across the country. As of February, I know there are still state agencies that can't access certain federal grants and others where access is unknown to funding distribution schedules. This remains dynamic and can change by the day, and the governor's office is working to just continue to track what agencies can and cannot access federal funding. We do know that some HECC did temporarily lose access to some of the portals, but that's been restored, and at this point in time, all balances have been paid. So just have been working with the HECC team to monitor this really closely. And as of mid-February, federal dollars in jeopardy, they appear to be concentrated in our natural resource cabinet. So that's really where I think a lot of the ongoing freezes continue to be an issue. It's our understanding, though, that funds promised by the federal government cannot be taken back by the federal government. So we know we depend on these funds. And as a reminder, these are Oregonians' federal tax dollars at work. So just wanted to address that we're monitoring the situation closely, and also wanted to address, again, the executive orders related to DEI. I know the governor shares HECC's commitment to equitable access to and success in post-secondary education and training. This work will continue because our law protects the principles of anti-discrimination and equity and inclusion. And again, just reiterate what I know Chair Rowe and Director Cannon have said, that this dates back long history of reflective of decades of bipartisan efforts by Oregon policymakers. So I know HECC is continuing to work with us to assess the impact of federal actions on Oregon for DEI-related executive orders, but that we just want to remain committed to ensure work continues, and that work will continue as usual. And we're also, I just want to name, actively reviewing the changes when it comes to jobs and contracts in Oregon and DEI. And again, just want to reiterate that we're committed to ensuring that the executive action does not impact how HECC enters contracts. So I just wanted to share again the governor's commitment to upholding Oregon's values, and just appreciate just Ben, your leadership and working closely with me in our office, and Chair Rowe, just continue to appreciate your leadership at the HECC through some of these challenging times. We're about to head into, or we are, like I say, we're in a legislative session. So that's going to be, of course, in addition to ensuring we're staying coordinated, just going to be rolling up our sleeves and getting to work on the governor's agenda over the next several months. So again, appreciate the invite today, and I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
Questions? Sarah? Anyone?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Devlin.
Yes, Sarah. When they put in place the temporary freeze, and I know it was on grants, but Did that have any impact in the Medicaid area temporarily? Because that would place a significant problem for any state budget, actually.
I understand that the Medicaid portal was shut off for a while, but then was reinstated. And at this point in time, we don't anticipate significant impacts in that space at this time, but we're closely monitoring the situation. Yeah, I think most of the what we understand the impacts to be right now are concentrated in the natural resource climate space.
Thank you.
Any
You're
other
welcome.
questions? Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Okay, now we will move to our public testimony. I see that Dr. Lisa Scari, the president of Mount Hood Community College, or no, Lisa is invited guest, not signed up guest. Are you here, President Scari?
It is possible. We got a note from her this morning, Chair Rowe, that because of the weather situation and the wind in East County, she may lose power. And if that was the case, she wouldn't be able to join. Commissioners, we invited President Scari from Mount Hood Community College to just give a sense from the sort of on the ground perspective about the impacts associated with the presidential transition. She's been obviously closely monitoring the situation at her institution and talking to other college leaders about theirs. So if Lisa's able to join at some point today, perhaps we'll have the time to go back to her, Chair Rowe, but it appears that she's not on the line currently.
That would be fun, and we can come back to her. We wanted her, Ben and I asked her here because, as he said, to get the community college level, but also to get it more down to students, because of course she's direct contact with a lot of students. And so we wanted to know from the community college perspective, sort of what the officers there are hearing and feeling. So to get a little bit more of that impact. So if she comes later, we will find time for her. Any signed up testimony, Guthrie, that I'm not aware of?
Madam Chair, there is not any signed up oral testimony. There are a number of written testimony included in your materials packet, including a late edition this morning submitted by Holly Nelson on behalf of the Bachelor of Science in Nursing Community College Collaborative that is now included as 5.0E.
And Guthrie, I think Holly Nelson had requested to present orally this morning as well.
Oh, understood. I may have missed that. Let me see if I can find Holly and promote her to a presenter. Holly, you should be now able to join by video and audio.
Let me, just 1 second, Holly. Let me jump ahead just because the next thing we'll get to are the consent items, which of course includes the RN to BSN degrees in the consortium of 6 colleges. And that also is what you have the letter in your packet from Brent Wilder with the Oregon Alliance of Independent Colleges. And so before she speaks, I just wanted you to know it is my intention when we get to that, having both of these letters, it's my intention that we will go on and consider it as part of the consent agenda without discussion. However, if because of these letters or because of anything else, you want to pull the RN to BSN items from the agenda or from the consent in order to discuss them, we can do that. But now we will go on. So you have the letter from Brent Wilder, you have the letter from Holly Nelson, and now we will hear from Holly Nelson. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Rowe, Director Cannon, and members of the HECC Commission. My name is Holly Nelson, and I'm the Chief Workforce Innovation Officer at Chemeketa Community College. Over the last 18 months, I've had the privilege of leading the Bachelor of Science in Nursing Community College Collaborative, a consortium of 6 community colleges developing an RN to BSN pathway. I feel privileged to work with an incredible group of colleagues who are extremely collaborative and dedicated to serving students through equitable pathways focused on career and educational advancement. Our consortium has provided written testimony, which I hope you will find in your packet. The testimony provides responses and feedback addressing the concerns shared by the Oregon Alliance of Independent Colleges and Universities in relation to today's agenda item, asking the Commission to approve the degrees for the RN to BSN pathway at all of our 6 institutions. Our collaboration is focused on serving local students from 6 institutions, in particular, rural students who have served in our associate's degree nursing programs locally at each college. Although over half of the curriculum is online, each institution is providing local wraparound and in-person supports for students, focused on retention and meeting students where they are. Community colleges serve the most marginalized students in our state. We are diverse in who we serve, and we are focused on local workforce needs within our communities. Our advisory committee for the consortium is made up from employers from each college district, representing employers across the state who are very supportive of providing the local support and an additional pathway in our state for RN to BSN students. This consortium model is unique in that all institutions are sharing faculty, and all institutions have provided input and feedback to the degrees you see before you today. The shared model is also a way to address the nursing faculty hiring issues all of us experience. Also, within the RN to BSN model, the clinical capacity issue in question is not a concern. The majority of this new program and curriculum is didactic, and the clinical portions of the education are already coordinated in our associate's degree nursing programs, which we all have. Above all, we expect this pathway to be extremely affordable and accessible for students in this collaborative and shared model. You will find more detailed information in the written testimony in your packet. Lastly, I respectfully draw your attention that the Alliance's concerns were brought forward outside of the HECC process and timelines, which allows for a 90-day waiting period in this first step for approval. The period ended over 6 months ago, with no concerns shared at that time and during the 3-month waiting period we went through. At that time, the Commission approved our consortium to move forward in the next steps for approval. Today, all 6 institutions are represented and present online. We hope that you will consider our degrees as they move forward. And if there's any questions, we're happy to take those. Thank you for your time and consideration today. Thank you.
You're muted, Andy.
Got it. Thank you. I won't ask for questions now because that's the public testimony that we normally don't question. So we are going to move to the consent item. And again, if you want to discuss these items, then we will pull it out of consent. So can I have a motion either to pull something out of consent, or can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda for community colleges?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor indicate by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now let's go to the university program approval consent items. It's 3 items from University of Oregon and 1 from OSU. Move to approve.
Move to approve.
Thank you. In a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor indicate by
Aye.
saying aye. Aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, I want to add one thing, because going back to the RN to BSN, because this kind of cooperation and consortia approach is new to us, and may have or likely will have further implications and potential programs down the road, Vice Chair Heyman has asked that We take a look as it goes forward. It's just so we understand more about it. So in a presentation, either at the next meeting or in a couple of meetings, we'll delve into how this is going to work and sort of barriers that came about, because this is something very new, and so could be a good lesson for us. Is there anything to add there, Vice Chair Heyman, in terms of what you're seeking as we come back and look at this more closely?
No, Chair Rowe, I really appreciate that. I think I think we have in our strategic plan an interest in a variety of ways in which our institutions can collaborate, and I'm interested in learning more about this one. And I think it'd be a great opportunity for us to understand perhaps an early venture into this area. So,
thank you. Okay, so we can look forward to that. Okay, I think next we have our legislative report. Is Kyle Thomas here?
Yeah, good morning, Chair
Thank you,
Rowe.
Kyle. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Chair Rowe, members of the Commission, Kyle Thomas, Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs for HECC. So we are in the early stages of legislative session now, just over 3 weeks in. This is the busiest part of session, with essentially the peak number of bills that have the potential for action, excuse me, being out and available for discussion. Over the course of the next several weeks, heading towards the first deadlines for bills to be heard, scheduled, and voted out of committee, the number of active bills in play will slowly dwindle. So we're tracking right now about 250 pieces of legislation. That's about 10% of the total volume of bills that have been introduced so far. The only thing that tracking means is that we're keeping an eye on it. We don't have the capacity or even the need to involve ourselves in all of these bills. We track a lot of bills that have general statewide impacts, that deal with pass-through appropriations for non-educational services that are housed at institutions, or affect our partners in ways that are not related to HECC's core mission and functions. We don't just track bills for what they say, but for what they might say if they were amended by others, or they could say if we ourselves went to legislators and proposed amendments. We track them because of our need to provide analysis on the fiscal impacts of those measures, which is something that we do on a few hundred measures over the course of session. During session, we have a few jobs. We advocate for the bills that we've introduced and for the importance of higher education and workforce development in the state. We inform legislators about the topics that are of their interest or that are important to the sector, activity that we've done quite a bit already through a half dozen legislative presentations so far in multiple legislative meetings. And we advise legislators both about the things that they can do with bills, amendments, and their voice to advance their priorities related to higher education and workforce development. But also we advise them when we believe they're pursuing policies or initiatives that our professional staff don't necessarily think are likely to lead to positive outcomes for the sector. I'll transition just to briefly to talk about the 6 bills that we have introduced in the legislative session. As I've said previously, owing to the owing to the governor's recommended budget and the general sort of tight fiscal environment generally, these bills are more incremental in the policy shifts they make, rather than representing implementation of significant new or dramatically altered programming. We've had 2 public hearings on our bills so far. That's House Bill 3027 and House Bill 3028, both of them related to the operations of our private post-secondary unit, one which allows us to seek injunctive relief in court if a private career school is not responsive to other compliance efforts that we have initiated. And the second is to repeal the statutory fee schedule for private degree granting institutions of higher education and allow the agency some additional flexibility related to the timing of those fee modifications by adopting those fee modifications in rule. We had those public hearings last week. They were not contentious. They were supposed to receive, those 2 bills were supposed to receive a vote in committee today, but the Capitol is closed due to weather, so we expect that those will be rescheduled rather soon. The other 4 bills that we have all been tentatively scheduled, they're not publicly scheduled, but we have reason to believe that those bills will all be heard on March 11th. which is plenty of time in advance of the deadline for those bills to make it out of committee. Those 4 bills are one related to the Oregon Opportunity Grant, removing the shared responsibility model from statute, authorizing us to award students in short-term credential programs, and matching the residency requirements for the Oregon Opportunity Grant with other state-funded financial aid programs. We are likely to get a small amendment to this bill after some feedback we've received from members of our Student Aid Advisory Committee, and that is on the topic of short-term credentials, and we expect that the amendment will clarify the parameters of agency rulemaking around how short-term credentials qualify to be programs that can receive financial aid, but also to deal with potential implementation hiccups. Short-term Pell is a topic that has been recently under discussion by the federal government. So the amendment will likely allow the commission to seek a 1-year delay on implementing financial aid for short-term credentials if there are sort of technological, sort of very structural implementation questions that campuses need additional time or HECC staff need additional time to resolve, or if the federal government is indeed making moves towards implementing short-term Pell, that extra time could be necessary to make sure that our program, their program, are in alignment with each other. The other 3 bills we have a minor and technical revisions bill. I won't discuss that, but we will at some point in the next couple of weeks drop an amendment that will clarify the items in that bill. We have House Bill 3029, which provides some general updates to the workforce system as HECC oversees and implements programs within it, specifically Future Ready Oregon and Workforce and Talent Development Board initiatives, as well as certain youth programs. Largely, that bill seeks to incorporate some lessons that have been learned from Future Ready Oregon. We do have a request from the 9 local workforce boards or Oregon Workforce Partners for some amendments related to that bill. We are currently in the process of reviewing those amendments that they've requested, and we'll hopefully come to some consensus about an amendment package that will come out before the public hearing, so that we can, when we talk about the bill at that public hearing, we can talk about the bill and the amendments concurrently. And the last bill that we're expecting to have a hearing on next month is on the Oregon Administrative Scholars Program. This is a bill that establishes in HECC a program that's currently operated at the Teacher Standards Practices Commission for aspiring culturally and linguistically diverse education administrator candidates. That's it for our bills today. The rest of your docket contains a whole list of bills that have been introduced by legislators or legislative committees, all in various stages in the process. Because we're so early in the process, the fact that these bills are listed and some of them don't necessarily have hearings that have been held or hearings that have been scheduled should not in any way be taken as an indication of whether or not those bills will move or will not. It's simply too early in the process. There's plenty of committee time and hearing time left to go, and plenty left unscheduled that will be scheduled. But I'll just talk about a couple of these bills this morning, just to give you a somewhat of a flavor of what is ongoing at the legislature as we speak. So a couple of bills under the access and affordability category. We have House Bill 2421. This adds private nonprofit institutions of higher education into the direct admission system that we are developing pursuant to a statutory mandate that we acquired just in 2024. So that is under development. Veronica Dujan's office, the Office of, sorry, I'm forgetting the office, APA, Veronica Dujan's shop, is administering that program. We've worked with the private nonprofit institutions on this language to bring them into the fold if the private institution desires to be brought into the fold here. House Bill 2550 is a bill that's introduced by the chairperson of the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee, Representative Zach Hudson. This significantly alters the Oregon Promise program by removing the graduation recency requirements and GPA requirements for that program, opening that program up to any adult learner that seeks to attend community college. You may have seen a news article in the Oregonian about this. We testified mostly to the budgetary impact of that proposal, indicating to the legislature that in order to implement that proposal without any sort of income caps that the promise occasionally does have to implement, it would cost an additional $67 million above the state's current service level. Alternatively, we indicated to legislators that if they were not able to or did not wish to provide additional funding, basically desired to alter the promise program in a way that it was not intended to serve any qualified applicant, but was in fact income capped, that cap would be at a level that it essentially is the lowest possible student aid index rating that is possible under the new FAFSA formula. So that's a SAI of negative 1,500. We have House Bill 2686. This is a bill that would provide HECC with funding to issue a grant to establish a recruitment effort to bring adults back with some college credit but no degree into any public institution of higher education of their choosing. These initiatives are often done on an institution by institution basis. Some states are seeing some pretty good results with efforts that are not institution by institution, but rather statewide efforts that go and offer students the chance not just to go back to the institution where they have accrued credit, but any institution across the state that may be an institution that's more appropriate for them given their educational desires today. We have House Bill 3182, and I'll talk about that together with House Bill 3183. This is a basic needs package. These bills should be taken together. 3182 provides funding for basic needs programming at institutions of higher education. This is either funding that can be provided. Sorry, I'm hearing.
I'm trying to find who that is and mute them. Apologies, Kyle.
So yeah, I'll keep going. 3182 provides funding either for institutions to provide direct to students for their basic needs, or that can be used to bolster basic needs programming and infrastructure on campuses. So it's flexible money that institutions would be able to use as they most saw fit according to their individual institutional needs. There's also funding in this bill to provide housing support for low-income students, as well as a task force to examine issues of student housing more holistically. The second bill is a bill that provides increased appropriations for the statewide Open Educational Resources Program. That's the program that has been for several years now successfully helping faculty in the state both develop course materials that are free or very, very low cost for students to use, as well as doing the work of getting those materials into more classrooms throughout the state. We have a couple bills that we typically see related to faculty pay and faculty loads across institutions of higher education. We have House Bill 2669. This is a faculty pay equity bill requiring community colleges to pay part-time faculty at the same hourly rate as full-time faculty are paid. We monitor that bill primarily for the fiscal impact potential that it has on institutions. House Bill 2841, somewhat related, requires institutions to increase the ratio of their full-time instructors up to 75% by the 27-28 academic year. And then the last bill I'll talk about today is a bill on data collection. It's actually two bills that are the same bill introduced in the House and the Senate. House Bill 2508 and Senate Bill 312, both requiring the Department of Education to standardize the data that they collect from school districts. And interestingly to HECC is that data collection would include student course record data. So that's interesting to us, both for the initiative we have ongoing for direct admissions, but for, of course, other purposes as well. I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions on bills I've talked about or other bills or other topics. Thanks.
Questions for Kyle?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Devlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had one question and then one request. The question is, what happens with bills that maybe don't impact HECC directly or maybe do not impact higher education in terms of HECC's relationship to higher education institutions, but could impact individual higher education institutions in a sense, like anything that relates to like contracting process, relates to labor relations. I mean, universities and community colleges are employers and they're contracting a lot, and there's a lot of issues out there. Do those normally come up on our radar, or do we depend upon institutional representatives to actually represent themselves in the legislature?
Commissioner Devlin, both are true. They are both on our radar. We are tracking them. We have some interest in them, both for what they say and obviously the amendments that could be offered that could bring HECC more directly into a space. A lot of times you see bills that do start out affecting institutions just generally related to them as sort of, I'll use very loosely use the term like corporate entities, more than they affect them as higher education providers. We let the institutions take the lead on those, right? We have not really very little generally to say about them. We lack the data and information necessary to be really active participants in those conversations. A lot of bills that have to do with their prerogatives in human resources and labor, for example, right? We don't collect faculty data. We have no statutory oversight role there. So yes, the institutions are the ones that are in the building having those discussions. We care very deeply about those bills, though, because ultimately at some point they could be amended to provide HECC with some sort of oversight or reporting responsibility in a way that we may deem is appropriate for our purpose and place in the higher education system we have here, or we may actually think they're inappropriate for that purpose. And if that's the case, we will go in and have conversations with partners and legislators about those items.
Madam Chair, the second question or statement, could you briefly explain, because I know some people are new to this process, why you have to watch bills that maybe are not impacting directly HECC, and particularly relating to what the relating clause is?
Yeah.
And even though Legislative Council in recent years has tried to craft relating clauses more narrow, sometimes they get through the process and they have very broad relating clauses.
Yeah, absolutely, Commissioner Devlin. So relating clauses are a lobbyist's best friend and worst enemy. They are a statement that's placed at the top of a piece of legislation that becomes a binding clause on what can be contained within a piece of legislation. They can be very broad, related to education. They can be very specific, related to qualifications for eligibility for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. So the first bill can contain any subject matter, regardless of what that bill starts out as. It can be fully stripped out and amended with a completely different statutory language, so long as it has any relation at all to education. The second bill, much harder to amend, related to eligibility for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. There's only so much you can put in that bill that would be deemed appropriate under that relating clause. So we track dozens of bills that have very broad relating clauses that today we care absolutely nothing about. There's study bills that are placeholders or just related to just things that don't come within our sphere. But nonetheless, we track them because we know that at any time, if a legislator is looking for a bill that has a relating clause that they can use, that can happen. A bill that the committee has already decided not to move forward with can just sit out there until another legislator or lobbyist or partner decides they need it for something else. So yeah, we're watching all of those.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Devlin, and thank you for the legislative lesson, Mr. Thomas. We appreciate both. Any other questions for Kyle? Thank you, sir. Glad you get today to catch up instead of being in the building.
That's right.
Okay. We have scheduled a break, but we're about 45 minutes early. Ben or Guthrie, do you want us to go forward, or I'm fine taking a 10-minute break now? Or commissioners, do you have a preference?
Can we, maybe this is a good time to check whether Lisa Scari has been able to join. I'm guessing not because we haven't heard from her. So seems like that's a no. Chair Rowe, I think it's really up to you how to proceed. Our next item, scheduled item, is we have 2 reports for your consideration and approval that will be presented by Amy Cox and Juan Baez-Arevalo from HECC. I believe they are both on the line, and we could take one and break, or break now. I mean, I think we're ready to go with those reports, Madam Chair.
Okay, I see Amy Cox. We'll go ahead with Amy's, and then we will break before the Oregon Promise report.
Thank you, Chair Rowe. For the record, my name is Amy Cox, and I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Data at the HECC, and my colleague Juan Baez-Arevalo, the Director of the Office of Student Access and Completion, is here as well. This is a report about the Oregon Opportunity Grant that our office puts together. Oftentimes what happens when we present on one of the financial aid programs is there are very programmatic related questions, especially looking forward. Our work is always dependent on data we receive, so it's always looking backward. And so if you have questions that are looking forward or that are particularly program related, I will invite Juan to chime in. You have the report in front of you. I do have some slides just to help guide the discussion based on the findings in the report. I'm going to share screen on those. Moving forward, let's see here. The Oregon Opportunity Grant, many of you are very familiar with this program by this point, but for those of you who are less familiar, I wanted to just orient you. The Oregon Opportunity Grant is Oregon's largest financial aid grant for college and university students by far. It is a need-based grant program run out of the Office of Student Access and Completion, as I mentioned. It serves more than 36,000 students every year. It is a large program. Many of you have been around for some years and seen successful expansion of the budget of the Opportunity Grant in the last several years. This year's evaluation is one that really starts to see some of the impact of that. The grants themselves have risen in size as part of that budgetary expansion. In 22-23, which is the focus year of the report in front of you, those were up to $3,600 for full-time community college students and almost $4,700 for students at bachelor's degree granting institutions. That includes both public universities and private colleges and universities. Students who submit a complete FAFSA, federal application for student aid, or ORSA, the Oregon application for student aid, are eligible. And the funding is distributed up until it is expended based on students' income backgrounds, in particular using in earlier years than 24-25, the expected family contribution starting in 24-25 using the student aid index that's part of the FAFSA. This year's report looks at the students who are receiving the Opportunity Grant, how it affects affordability, and what their success and performance is. The statute requires that we look at student success and performance as part of the evaluation of the program to see what the impact is on that. We also look at its impact on affordability, both for those students and for university and college students sort of writ large, for the state as a whole, if you will. As I mentioned, there was this significant expansion in 22-23. This was followed an expansion in 21-22. So the program has grown. because its budget has grown. Not only did the income cap, or the EFC cap, which is not the same thing as income, I shouldn't have said that. It's based on income as well as other factors. The EFC cap rose in the year of focus here to be, as you see, $8,000, which is well above the EFC limit for the federal Pell Grant. That is a significant expansion to reach more students. In addition, the size of the grant rose in this year, rose 30%. So more students are receiving the grant and they're getting more money. So part of the question that we asked when looking at this year's, when sitting down to do this year's analysis, was, with that expansion, is the grant still serving? Who is the grant serving compared to who it used to be serving? With that higher income background, that higher EFC limit, it occurs to us that perhaps it's not as likely to be serving students who are underrepresented in college and university in the way it has in the past. But that is not what we found. What we found that even under the expanded eligibility, the program continues to serve students from many groups that are underrepresented in college and university, in particular, students of color, students from rural areas, and older students who are all underrepresented in degree granting institutions. In addition, they still look similar to, in terms of percentages, I didn't put the table in here, it's in the report, but they still look similar to previous year's recipients where that EFC limit was much lower. This is relevant not only from an ethics perspective, but also from a very practical state economic perspective. The state has a projected need for more post-secondary workers who have degrees. And if the grant is helping support those underrepresented communities and helping support their success and performance, it helps meet that economic need of the state. Looking at affordability, affordability, as you know, I've said this in other ways, in other presentations, is a particular issue for students from lower income backgrounds. That sounds obvious, but what I mean by that is even after we take into account financial aid, federal financial aid, state financial aid, the battle, the challenge, the affordability hill to climb is much greater for students coming from low-income families than for students coming from middle or upper income families, even after we take into account the available aid. The fact of the matter is, even with the opportunity grant, more than half of the recipients, we estimate, would not be able to cover the full cost of attendance at their school. That's after we take into account institutional aid, federal Pell grants, other state grants that they may be receiving, and of course the opportunity grant. So a significant number. However, without the opportunity grant to help them, that number would be 2/3. So the opportunity grant in this most recent year of expansion sort of single-handedly reduces the proportion of students facing unmet need who would not be able to cover all of the costs of attendance to the tune of about 4,300 students. Of course, it's helping the affordability for all the students that receive it, right? All of them have more resources available to them. More than 4,000 move from that group of cannot cover the full cost of attendance to can cover the full cost of attendance. And then lastly, the academic success and performance. We looked at, because this was a single year of expansion, we did not look at graduation rates this year because it will include students who had many different eligibility criteria, and it sort of muddies the waters, if you will. Instead, as we did last year with the expansion last year, we look at some more short-term measures of student success and performance. Those include retention from term to term, right? Fall to winter retention, winter to fall to spring retention. Do students stay continually enrolled? And do they come back the following year? so fall to fall retention, as well as the number of credits they earned, right? So are they earning credits that are really helping them progress toward that degree? And what we found, even at this expanded eligibility level, was something similar to what we found in prior years. And that is that the students who receive the OOG, who are coming from these lower income backgrounds, many of whom still facing significant affordability challenges, just many of them coming from groups who are not, who are first generation and not well represented in colleges and universities, they're still doing as well or better than their higher income peers, than their peers who are not first generation, than their peers who are coming from families who have multi-generational post-secondary experiences. This is a significant finding because we would typically, students from lower income backgrounds, all other things being equal, don't do as well. So even doing as well is a success story. And furthermore, the students at the community colleges actually do better. The students at the community colleges who receive the opportunity grant do better on all 4 of these measures than their higher income peers who filed a FAFSA but didn't have an EFC that made them eligible for the opportunity grant. We also compared them to earlier years of recipients because of this change in the program, very similar rates of retention and number of credits. There's isolated differences, but there's no pattern there that would suggest anything less than similar rates of retention and number of credits. So we put this together not only in context of this year's report, but also in context of prior years' reports. We've been evaluating this program now. I think this is the 4th or 5th year our office has looked at the numbers and looked at the data, gotten student data from the private institutions as well, and looked at this across all of these different groups. And what we saw this year, first of all, is that, like I said, even with the expanded eligibility, the opportunity grant is continuing to serve the students who have the greatest financial need, which is sort of a defining characteristic of the program, but also who come from underrepresented and in many cases underserved communities in higher ed. The expansion opened the grant to more students and increased the grant size, and we saw the affordability bump up higher for those students this year than we did in earlier years. And then finally, those students who receive the OOG, as I said, do as well or better than their higher income peers. In the context of earlier versions of this report, what I will tell you is this is the rare program in my experience as a public policy researcher that has such consistent findings, or I should say such consistent positive findings. One can find programs that have consistently negative, but such consistent positive findings. They're positive across groups of students. They're positive across eligibility levels. They're positive across years. And perhaps most importantly to those of us in the research community, they are positive across multiple different measures of student success. So we can look at grad rates, we can look at retention rates, we can look at credits earned, and we continue to see that the students with the OOG do as well or better than their higher income peers, or than other low income students who don't get the opportunity grant. When you combine this with the fact that the state needs more people, more workers who have post-secondary degrees, and this program is something that supports the academic success of communities who are less represented on the track to getting those degrees, it really seems like a no-brainer to recommend continued expansion and support of the program.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for that wrapping up summary headline at the end of your report. I hope in terms of anything that goes to the legislature about this time, or any testimony on the related bills, that you are able to start with that and finish with it, if you can.
Chair
That's
Rowe,
just,
I'm so sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say I will be speaking to the legislature and to the subcommittee, the education subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee, with Juan on Monday. And yes, we will absolutely lead with that.
Yeah, it's and for you to be able to say that, I mean, I knew it was successful, but without having your experience in the research community and vast knowledge of it, for you to say that across all of those measures it's successful is really extraordinary. That's something to be very proud of, and we should sing it from the rooftops if we can.
Well, I absolutely concur, and I would, you know, I would certainly defer to Juan and his team, and to the strong efforts of this commission and of staff in the agency, to making the program as successful as it is. All we did is sort of run the numbers and do the analysis. We had no contribution there, except to try and communicate these positive outcomes as much as we can.
Well, they're huge. Thank you to the whole team. Questions for Amy, for Dr. Cox? Go ahead, Commissioner Yamasaki.
Oh, thank you. So, Amy, is there any difference between the outcomes between those that are like first time your traditional students versus, because I know we differentiate between younger students and older students returning and receiving the opportunity grant? So that would be my first question. And the second thing that struck me, and I just want to make sure I read this right, that out of all the students, only 12.5% did we really cover the total cost of attendance. Is that correct?
Commissioner Yamasaki, for your second question, I'd have to look and see where you're seeing that in the report, and follow up with you. But I will say that we don't see consistent or sizable patterns of difference across the students. That is the case across we have looked, and in prior years' reports, we've included sizable appendices to sort of lay those differences out. We'd be happy to include one by age group or by new and returning. And what we see are, in many ways, patterns we see outside of the opportunity grant, but we don't see differential impacts of the opportunity grant on different groups of students in any sort of sizable or consistent way.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Martinez.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm wondering if she accidentally hung
We
up.
lost you for a minute. Whoops. We assume she will find her way back on. Any other questions? Commissioner Devlin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to get into the complexities of this because there could be a lot of other issues, and perhaps best for time for another discussion. When we're considering those students that are not having their needs met, and we're considering parental resources, student resources, state aid, federal aid, we're not considering subsidized federal loans, right?
Commissioner Devlin, we do not include subsidized federal loans in students' resources, no. We have that information for university students only. We don't have that information for others, and for students in other sectors, I should say. But in addition, we want a measure that clarifies where students are at without loans. I think that there would be it would be a really helpful and interesting analysis to be able to look at it with and without federal subsidized loans. Not to mention, of course, the private ones, which are in a whole different category. But we don't have most of those data, unfortunately, to really be able to look at that impact of the loan. So we create the affordability measure with only existing resources, not borrowed ones. Having said that, I should say, making the assumption that families can do have the resources to cover that expected family contribution, or SAI, which of course ranges, but we do make that assumption.
Well, I was asking the question is because I know that, remember the factors in our meeting the other day, I've asked for the availability of some kind of presentation for those of us that have not been in the system for quite a while, or who don't even have children that have been in the system in quite a while. I've helped a few grandchildren through the system, and I now have a new great-grandchild, and I'm soon going to have another new great-grandchild, and I'm not going to be around to help them, although I may leave them enough to help them fairly well. But even on the subsidized, my understanding is obviously there's a limited amount dependent upon what year you're in, whether you're independent or whether you're have a family contribution. But in many cases, that smaller amount still wouldn't get you to the level of meeting the attendance costs, even with what income the student could actually produce on their own. Say if there's no family contribution, what we might think that they could get from their own employment. So it'd be interesting, and I know this is hard to, actually hard to do. I'm not requesting it at this time, is to see what those students do, because these are obviously students. They're finding some way to be able to attend. How are they doing it? I mean, in a sense, are they getting a combination of subsidized and then private sector loans? Well, it might be realistic to expect a freshman student to work 15 hours a week. It would probably not be good for their success rate for them to work 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week. What are they doing? I mean, how are they meeting the gap? And for those students that are like above our income thresholds, that don't have a great deal of family resources and aren't going to meet the opportunity grant or the Pell Grant, or they might get the Oregon Promise, but how do they make it? How do they meet those requirements in terms of cost?
Thank you.
Commissioner, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
Commissioner Devlin, I don't have quantitative data to tell you, so I don't have generalizable data. We do have ample anecdotal data, qualitative data that I will tell you students are meeting those gaps in, of course, a variety of ways, right? Some of them are combining, staying at home and not paying housing costs. That is not an option for all students, obviously, and it can curtail the educational options if you don't live near a campus. Students are working more than 15 hours a week. And most frequently what we hear is students are taking out loans, both public and private.
And all of that points to the need really to point out, despite the increases and the extraordinary success of this program, that we are still behind other states and similar states in the amount of aid we offer, and our students therefore face greater need, lest the legislature thinks it has done enough to increase funding for this program. We have ample evidence that there is more that needs to be done, a great deal more. Commissioner Hayman.
Yes, thank you, Chair Rowe. Amy, first, I want to thank you for this presentation. I always love to hear a report that indicates that something we're doing is really successful, and that's great to hear. I for one think that the Opportunity Grant is perhaps the most powerful tool we have to create equitable access to education, not necessarily the full access that we seek, but equitable access, and I'm appreciative of your support of that. I have one question. It's either for you or perhaps for Juan. Given all that you know about this program and its success. Do you have any suggestions for how it could be changed to make it even better, besides just adding more money?
I would turn to my colleague Juan Baez-Arevalo to answer that question if he is available. I would certainly answer it with more resources, but I'm imagining Juan probably has more nuanced answers than that.
I directed it to both of you, so thank you.
Juan, go ahead.
A great question. Chair Rowe, members of the commission, for the record, my name is Juan Baez-Arevalo, Director of the Office of Student Access and Completion. Great question. And there are several ways that the OG could be further strengthened to, and I would say increases batting average, because if you look at the batting average of the OG and the results that we're getting are very, very significant, consistent, and significant. And one of the things to visualize is the Oregon Opportunity Grant is truly the tide that lifts all boats. And we're lifting it up from the bottom. And you've seen over the years, through the reforms, through the changes that we've made, through the consistent and persistent requests for very significant funding increases. And we have seen that in the last several years and several biennium now in a row of increases to the investment in the Oregon Opportunity Grant. So first and foremost, yes, we still need more investment. And you will recall that a couple of years ago, we made a very audacious request for a hefty investment. And the idea of that was to broaden that basin, to lift more boats, lift more people up. And we still need that, a higher level of investment, significant investment than what we have today. One of the things that we also are proposing, and Kyle referenced this to the Oregon Opportunity Grant bill that we have. And Commissioner Heyman, you will recall that years ago we had discussions in the Adult Learner Task Force. And one of the measures that back then OSAC began to recommend and suggest and propose was that we would amend laws that would allow OOG recipients to go directly into certificate programs, particularly short-term certificate programs. So that would allow individuals to not be in pursuit of a four-year degree or a two-year degree, but instead to focus on that targeted certificate that could benefit them more readily for the labor market, more readily for their career, and concentrate their utilization of their lifetime eligibility of the OOG on those skills they need, and then come back for a second, say, certificate or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree while still having remaining eligibility. And so we're pursuing that in the legislative session. I hope that we are successful, because that helps both young and heart learners who are coming into post-secondary education or returning in post-secondary education. One of the things that makes the Oregon Opportunity Grant very powerful and very functionable is that it allows students to start and stop. And so students, we have returning students who are young, and we have returning students who are much older. So it's a very broad category. And I think that flexibility of the Oregon Opportunity Grant is a powerful tool that empowers the learners, depending on what's going on in their life, to utilize it. So I think those are the things that we would continue to push for that additional reform, to let individuals go into short-term certificate programs at any of the qualifying post-secondary institutions that participate in this program. And that's community colleges, public universities, and private nonprofit institutions in the state of Oregon. So we hope to see that continue. We have over the years made some reforms with the OOG in terms of making it more accessible and more flexible. Those reforms, the way we've been able to do it is through the additional funds. And so I'm hopeful that continued increase in funding well above CSL is sustained for years to come, so we can elevate, we can raise the bar, so to speak. And in June, when we presented our desired investment and we mentioned $150 million above CSL, that particular level of investment would allow us to raise the bar by allowing individuals with a student aid index up to 10,000 to qualify for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. Today, we are 8,000 student aid index. So being able to increase to 10,000 will significantly expand the reach of the Oregon Opportunity Grant. And before closing, I wanted to just share with you a graphic, and we can send this over to you later. And this is who today we are impacting with an 8,000 student aid index. This graphic here, what you could see is the average contributor. This is the parent, the adult who contributes to a dependent student. This is the average adjusted gross income at 8,000 SAI. So the shift from EFC to SAI is very significant, is very different than the old EFC model. We are effectively, with the Oregon Opportunity Grant, serving middle-income Oregonians. And my colleague, Amy Cox, probably knows a lot better than I what the middle-income family income threshold might be in the state of Oregon, and where we might be alongside this table serving middle-income Oregonians. And Amy, feel free to comment about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. And if you can just, yeah, thank you. And Commissioner Martinez, you found your way back. Yay!
I know. Maybe I won't kick myself out this time. Thank you so much for this report too. I really found it, I appreciated all of the data, and especially even seeing the high schools and who's accessing it. I mean, we can be hopeful that they expand the eligibility as we look at some of the House bills going through. And I'm curious, tracking if we can see that increase specifically in some of those populations that we're trying to get into higher education, to give them better access by expanding that. Just at a workforce meeting here locally that I was at, we were talking about, some of these students coming out of high school and then just going into industry and then liking it and then realizing, oh, if I actually want to go on though, now I need some more higher education. And then having that huge barrier of the cost being a lot of why they don't go on. So I'm hoping that we can track some of that, or that the plans are if and when it expands, to see if those numbers increase. Thank you.
Commissioner Martinez, I appreciate that question. And the impact of the Opportunity Grant on the college going rate is an excellent issue that we absolutely need to track. And I think as we get a couple more years under our belt with the expanded resources, we'll be able to put some of that together in a more meaningful way. So thank you very much for that. Yes.
Any other questions? Excellent report on excellent work. Thank you very much, Juan and Amy. We appreciate it, and your teams. Okay, we will now take a break for 10 minutes, for 11 minutes. We'll come back at 10:40. So we are recessed until 10:40. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will go back in session. And you may have noticed that I got ahead of myself, which is not unusual, and gave us a break before we had done the only thing we were required to do, which was to vote to accept the report. Uh, so if I can now, we will go to the action item on the last on 9.1. If we could have a motion to approve the report on the Oregon Opportunity Grant, which will go to the legislature.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you again, Amy and Juan, and the report is accepted. Okay, now we are going to 9.2, which is the Oregon Promise Report. And we still have Amy and Juan.
Thank you very much, Chair Rowe. I am, don't know if I have to introduce myself again. I never can remember that, but for the record, I'm still Amy Cox, the Director of the Office of Research and Data. This action item in front of you next is another evaluation of another financial aid program. This is the Oregon Promise Program. It is a little less straightforward, I think, of a program and an evaluation than the Oregon Opportunity Grant. So I also have some slides here to help guide this. I do want to invite you to ask me questions as we go forward. If you do so, I can't always see in the chat, or with the hands while I present, so please do feel free to interrupt me. As I mentioned, the Oregon Promise Report. The Oregon Promise is a different kind of program than the Opportunity Grant. The Oregon Promise Program is focused on providing tuition costs, the average cost of 12 credits of community college tuition for recent high school graduates or GED test passers, completers, who want to enroll in a community college in Oregon within 6 months after either graduating from high school or completing that GED test. It has some enrollment requirements as well that include enrolling for at least 6 credits every term and staying enrolled for each fall, winter, and spring term. It pays for that tuition, that average cost of tuition, up to 90 credits. If students had 80 credits of accelerated learning that they earned during high school, which would be unusual, but if they did, the Oregon Promise could pay for 10 more. So those accelerated learning credits are part of that 90 credit cap. There is not, it is not income-based. It is not a needs-based program. It has an academic requirement of at least a 2.0 GPA. Until the most recent year, that GPA was 2.5. So a slightly looser eligibility requirement in the most recent year. It is funded to the tune of about $40 million every biennium, compared to the Opportunity Grant, which is funded, thank you, Juan, to the tune of about $300 million. So this is a much smaller program, and it is focused in particular on supporting students in continuing their education after completing secondary. This year's report focuses on, again, who is using the grant, who are the students being served by it, how is it affecting students and the state's affordability, and has it, and these last two questions are a little different than what you hear in like the Opportunity Grant, and they're really reflecting the program's design and intention. Has the Oregon Promise, expanded college going rates? Has it opened the door to college more widely for high school seniors who are graduating? And has it increased completion? Similar questions about student academic performance and success. Is it supporting students to increasing completion? The idea here that if the state would pay for the tuition costs at the local community college, that students would be more likely to continue their education and enrollment. So who is using this program? The program serves about 6,000 to 7,000 students, new students every year, 2,000 to 4,000 returning students. It's a much smaller program, as I said. It varies from year to year, but in the most recent year, 16% of high school graduates took advantage of this program. That is a relatively small slice of the post-secondary student body. 6% of all community college students outside of those in high school, but all post-secondary community college students, whether they're enrolled for credit or non-credit. 7% of all for-credit community college students and admitted undergraduates. So it serves this very sort of focused group of students coming through high school or GED and continuing on. The students themselves, there's a lot of data on this slide, but the students themselves, the point of it is to really illustrate that with few exceptions, those receiving the Oregon Promise look a lot like the high school graduating class, and they look a lot like new college and university students. They are somewhat more likely to identify as Latino, Latina, Hispanic. They are not in many other ways particularly different. They are slightly more likely to be women than high school graduates, but not appreciably more likely to be women than college and university students in general. They have similar geographic backgrounds. They're about a third of them come from rural areas, just like in high school graduates or all new college university students. And they're about as likely as the sort of freshman class in general, if you will, to be from a low-income background.
Commissioner Martinez, excuse me, Amy, Commissioner Martinez,
yes.
you have a question? Oh, sorry, you're still on. Commissioner Heyman.
A quick question. There doesn't appear to be a legend to the two bar graphs on the left, and I'm not sure I know what it means.
I apologize Vice Chair Heyman. That is an oversight on our part, and an excellent question, therefore. The darker green are students who are eligible for a Pell Grant, and the lighter green are students who are not eligible for a Pell Grant.
And how about down below?
Down below, I apologize again, the darker blue, students who come from rural areas, and the lighter blue, students who come from urban areas.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Amy,
thank you. Go.
Do you know? Oh, sorry. I apologize.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Do you know why there's such a low participation rate?
Well, Commissioner Yamasaki, that is sort of the question of the hour. I'm going to actually hold off on answering that till we get a little bit further, because in many ways you have the key question of the program. The program is designed as a last dollar program, such that students who receive a Pell Grant or an Opportunity Grant, that would first be used toward covering that cost of community college tuition, and then the promise would sort of fill in the gap. Anything that wasn't covered by a Pell or an Opportunity Grant would be covered by the promise. What that means is that students from low-income backgrounds, again, the darker blue or the darker green, students from low-income backgrounds have those Pels, and they're going to, and the Opportunity Grant these days, they're going to have a much smaller Oregon Promise Grant. They still do receive an Oregon Promise Grant, even if other grants cover the whole cost of tuition. They receive about a $2,000 grant that they can use toward books and other expenses in college, any other expenses. Excuse me. The effect of that in terms of the program's distribution of dollars is that students from low income backgrounds comprise about almost half, 46% of Oregon Promise grant recipients, but only about 30% of the Oregon Promise dollars go to that group. This is a sort of long-standing known feature of the program that those of you who have been around for a while have heard me say before, but I do want to make it clear to those of you who are newer. Commissioner Heyman, do you have another question? No. Okay. Then I will go on. The financial impacts of the program. The Oregon Promise, as designed, is intended to cover the cost of community college tuition. It is not designed to meet the entire cost of attendance for students who receive it. That is still the cost that students are facing, and it is the way we measure affordability. And so here what I have to show you is that what would the impact be if there were no Oregon Promise on that total cost of attendance? On the left, in the graph here, the bars on the left are Oregon Promise students. All of them, about 30% of them still cannot meet that total cost of attendance, even with the Oregon Promise, any other grants they have, their own resources, the EFC, all the ways that we measure that. But if they didn't have that Promise grant, it would have been 40%. And the bars on the right, this is the same information, but just for students in the Oregon Promise who are eligible for a Pell. So just for students from that low income background. And here you see that steeper affordability challenge for low income students. Half of them cannot cover the cost of attendance, even with the Promise grant, but that number would be close to 2/3, 65%, if there was no Promise grant in their resources. So definitely it is having an impact on the affordability or the ability to meet the affordability challenge for students who are receiving the grant. It translates, those percentages translate to about 600 to 900, depending on the year, 600 to 900 additional students every year, we estimate can meet the total cost of attendance because of the Oregon Promise. Because there's such a small slice of the larger student body, the impact on the overall student affordability rate is much lower, right? It's only about 2%, not 10% or 13% as it is among the Promise students. The program has also a goal built into it early on that it would bring more federal dollars into the state. It is students who receive the Promise or want to receive the Promise must complete a FAFSA if they're eligible to apply for federal aid, or an ORSA if they're not, and they must take the grants offered to them. Of course, very few students don't take the grants offered to them, but if they are eligible for a Pell, they must receive the Pell. So by design, it maximizes the amount of Pell dollars coming into Oregon for Oregon Promise students. It hasn't really had any sort of impact on the total Pell dollars in the state because, again, it's a small slice of the student body, of the college university student body. So in and of itself, it's not having a massive impact on the statewide measure, which is part of what we have to report to the legislature, but it does maximize it for the students who are receiving the grant. Now I want to talk about, has this program opened the doors to college wider and enabled or encouraged more students to continue their education after high school? We look at this by looking at all high school graduates, not by looking at just the Promise students or just college freshmen. And the reason for that is because the program itself can affect students' choices, right? Like I may have, as was suggested in the last agenda item, I may have imagined I would just go directly into into the workforce after graduating high school. Or I may have imagined that I would go to a public university, but now if the state's going to pay for my community college tuition, I might decide to start at the community college. So for that reason, we look at all high school graduates and we track how many of them in total go on to any post-secondary before and after the promise. And that's what this slide shows. So this green bar at the top is the total number of high school graduates in Oregon who enrolled in an Oregon college or university within 6 months of high school graduation, which is the requirement of the promise. And you will see 10 years ago in 2013 and 2014, that number was 43 to 44%. The first year of the promise, the high school graduating class of 2015-16, we see a clear bump. It rose 2 percentage points. That rise did not sustain. It fell back to its previous rate of 44%. And then the pandemic hit and it fell quite significantly. Since the pandemic, we have seen the rate rise in the last 2 years to 41%. But it still is not even as high as it was before the promise. So the lines below are simply the sector-specific percentages, how many students went to a community college, how many went to a public university. It is distinctly possible that the current college going rate here, 41% for the most recent year, would be lower if there were no Oregon promise. That is certainly possible. This is an association, it is not a causation. However, I cannot stand here and tell you that there is any evidence that the promise has raised rates. That is sort of the takeaway. When we look at this separately by different groups of students, we don't see the promise leading to a higher college going rate for any particular group of students, nor do we see it necessarily closing equity gaps either. So this is the same, this is that green line, but broken out by race ethnicity. And you see the clear impact of the pandemic. But what you also see is that the gap in 22 for the high school graduating class of 23 is very similar to the gap for the high school graduating class of 2014. Just really not showing any sort of sustained increase resulting from the promise. Similarly, we looked at it by rural urban, which is this lower left chart, and all these are in the report too, and by gender. And we don't see any sustained impact there either. In fact, for us, the geographic gap, it is wider today, really an impact mostly of the pandemic. It is wider today. There is a bigger gap in college going between students coming from rural high schools and students coming from urban high schools than there was 10 years ago. And then lastly, has the Oregon Promise led to more completion? We don't see evidence that leading to more college going. Has it led to more completion? This is the promise has, as I mentioned at the beginning, these enrollment requirements of students have to be enrolled all 3 terms in that to maintain eligibility, and they have to be enrolled for at least 6 credits. You will see that Oregon Promise students, which is the dark red line at the top, are meeting these requirements almost universally, right? So, almost 3 terms, 2.9 on average for Oregon Promise students in that first year. They're enrolled almost 3 terms. Almost all students are meeting that. And credits, about 35, 34 credits earned by the end of that first year, which is an average of about 12 credits, almost 12 credits per term. I will note here this little dip at the end. It looks like all of a sudden the most recent cohort is not doing so well. There's an asterisk there. I would give you that as a note of caution. And it is simply because the most recent year of data, we simply don't have as many years of data to match high school students with all the other data in the office, right? So we don't have social security number to match this, to take those high school students and connect them to the other data in the office. So we often see a little dip in the most recent year of data. We'll see over time if that's related to GPA, the GPA eligibility change or something. But for the most part, for the time being, I would say don't read too much into that little dip. This is completion rates. 4-year completion rates on the bottom in the dashed lines, and 6-year completion rates on the top in the solid lines. Again, all high school students in green, the Oregon Promise students in this dark red, and we don't see any evidence here that the Promise has bumped up completion rates either. Completion rates are very similar, sometimes a little above, sometimes a little below, but none of those years the gap is large at all. For 4-year rates, very similar. 6-year rates, the Promise students are clearly consistently a little bit lower than all high school graduates. That might be an artifact of the fact that they start at the community college and transfer to a public or private institution, which can slow, can be related to slightly slower graduation times. The next round, we'll be able to look at them maybe at 7 years. There wouldn't really be enough years to look at that here. But certainly no evidence that the Promise has bumped up the completion rates. So if we take this together, what we see is that it is successfully serving the students who receive the grant. Their affordability is better. They have this support to continue their education. They still face significant affordability challenges, even with the grant, but the grant does help. But these wider statewide impacts outside of the students who are receiving the grant are not so rosy. We don't see evidence that the college going rate has increased in any sustained way with the grant. We don't see evidence that student momentum has increased more broadly. It certainly hasn't created a culture that extended past the Promise students, nor do we see any evidence that completion rates are higher statewide. So what does that all mean? Well, these are very consistent findings with national research. There have been a lot of Promise programs that have started up in the decade around this Promise program in other states, some of them in communities. They have different characteristics, different requirements, different benefits. But what we have seen and what the research has increasingly showed as those more years have gotten underway is that Promise programs that are structured really in ways that eligibility matches the eligibility for college going in general means it's not going to really, it doesn't really expand college going. To do so requires a different kind of structure, one that would be reaching students from communities that are less likely to attend college, right? So, and having the benefits flow more to them, that would be the way that those are the programs where college going has increased. That is not the way this program is structured. It is structured with the GPA requirement, which, as I noted, has lowered recently. That may support students, support bringing in more students. It's too early, very much too early to know if that has had an impact yet. But we certainly haven't seen, what we've seen in Oregon is consistent to what we've seen in other states and communities where eligibility matches the students who are already going to go. The promise is supporting the students who likely were already going to attend. I will say, in defense of the promise, the pandemic confounds all of these results. So take that into account as you assess these. But I cannot stand here and tell you that we have the set of consistent outcomes nor consistently positive outcomes for this program that we see in the Opportunity Grant.
So Amy, this is Gail. Talk a little bit more about the programs that you think are more successful. And so, just to help me understand what they're doing differently.
Well, there are a few things because they range, right? Some of them are focused on particular schools or areas that already have low college going and provide a more universal path. So they don't have the GPA requirements. They don't have the OSAC, of course, the Office of Student Access and Completion, institutes or implements this program in the way it does all of our financial aid programs, and Juan is on the line as well to answer questions. I will say that OSAC is bound by the budget in this program, and therefore sometimes has to put, not most years, but sometimes to stay within budget, has to put an EFC or SAI cap limit on the students who can get the grant. Those other programs, like I said, tend to be more universal, no GPA requirement, no cap. So there's no sort of navigating, would I qualify? Am I part of this? And it can enable, especially smaller communities, those focused on, like I said, a high school or a district, to be able to really trumpet the program as everybody can keep going. That is not feasible here with the current structure of the program. And I would also add, I guess, that there is a particular, by design, particular focus and outreach to those communities with those lower college going rates.
Commissioner Smith, I think I saw your hand next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I don't really have a question. I guess it's just kind of some observations about barriers for students to participate in this grant. One is that students have to be forward thinking. I mean, and this is college bound students, so they have to know, in their senior year when they're doing the FAFSA. And I mean, so that means that high school counselors have to be very involved. And I think I haven't paid a lot of attention to this in the last several years, but at the very beginning of the program, it was very difficult to get the buy-in and the understanding from high school counselors throughout the state to even share this program, or, so that might have been overcome in recent years, but still, those counselors are in touch with students who conceive of themselves as college going seniors. And so, for instance, if there's a student who doesn't conceive of themselves that way, or their family hasn't been engaged, or their counselors haven't been in contact with them, then they might graduate and just be like, oh gosh, that was so hard. I made it through school. I have my GED, or I have my diploma. I guess I don't know what now. I'll go get a job. And then, well, I don't know. What are my decision trees here? At that point, it's too late for them to take advantage of that. And I understand it's last dollar. So I think that's a barrier, the way it's structured in that way, that it's the last dollar thing. The other thing is, I'd like to see the goals of the program be less tied to, I get it because there's a budget, but, attracting those Pell dollars into the state. But, if it was conceived more of as an entitlement program, I'm not as concerned with it closing equity gaps so much as that it's a way of all families thinking that they have an opportunity to access college in the state of Oregon if they're Oregon graduates, and then, you know, recoup those dollars from the higher income families through progressive taxation or something, you know. I mean, this is like a complete like restructuring and reconception of the program. But I think that, you know, that it is only for students who are college going makes perfect sense because that's the way the program's structured in the beginning. And also, I just would like it to be more of, yeah, just a general entitlement program rather than having so many barriers to participation. That's all I'll say about that. And I don't think that's answerable, but I don't know, maybe you have some observations about that.
Commissioner Smith, I would say that what you're saying, and invite Juan to chime in if he wants to do so. What you're saying is consistent with the findings here and in other states. It does require some forward thinking to be able to complete the FAFSA, apply for the program, do so in a timely manner. That in and of itself is not a ill-intended design. It is designed to encourage students to be continuing to think about their education and encouraging counselors and schools to be encouraging that education. And at the same time, if one is not doing that, which one can miss the deadlines, and certainly those students who already were intending to go to college and continue their education would be the ones most likely to be having that foresight.
Commissioner Hayman, and then back to Commissioner Yamasaki.
Thank you, Chair Rowe, and appreciate Commissioner Smith's comments on, you know, perhaps changes we could make. Amy, I want to thank you for what is, I guess you'd consider a candid report on the Oregon Promise. I think it's important for us to fully understand, you know, both the positive and perhaps not so positive impacts that our programs have. An observation I would make, and related again to Commissioner Smith's comments, is it seems to me that the ways in which we would choose to make the Oregon Promise more effective would be to make it more like the Oregon Opportunity Grant. I guess I start with the thought that, you know, if I only have $50 million to put into student financial assistance, and I have to choose between those two programs, it's hard for me to see why we wouldn't put it in the Opportunity Grant as opposed to the Promise Grant. And perhaps you want to hazard a comment on that. But I think as commissioners, I'm looking at, you know, what do I actually get for the investment? And it seems to me that I have a much more positive and powerful opportunity to put those same dollars into a program that I think we've seen as proven in terms of its effectiveness. So just wanted to, since you did these presentations side by side, it was hard not to see that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that point, Commissioner Hayman. Commissioner Yamasaki.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, Greg, but one thing I'm wondering, because we know there is a trend of high school students not attending college as we project into the future. So what is the consequences of that we just know that less and less young people are enrolling?
Commissioner Yamasaki, I can absolutely speak to that. I started to say I'm happy to speak to that, which is not true. I'm not happy to speak to that because the consequences are not good. The consequences are that their economic stability in the future will be less. They will earn less money. They will be more. They will have higher unemployment. They will be more subject to economic downturns, to the impacts of economic downturns. There will be health consequences. These are the realities. The impacts for the state are a lower tax base, a higher social service rate, and fewer workers to fill jobs that require post-secondary degrees, and more workers to fill jobs that are entry level. Of course, there are post-secondary certificates in between those two. I don't want to lose sight of those. The promise supports being able to earn a certificate. The Opportunity Grant, as Juan noted recently, is not designed for that. That is also a critical need in the state in terms of the labor market, a post-secondary certificate that's not a degree. But the impact of not going to get a post-secondary credential of some form is a significant impact that's felt by individuals, by their families and communities, and by the state and its employers. It is a link we try to make in these reports to clarify for the legislature, and I'd be delighted to strengthen that link further in this report. It is a link that we try to make in our Ways and Means presentation because it is essential for the future, I would argue, for the future of the state's health, physical, social, and economic health, to increase the number of Oregonians who earn post-secondary credentials. And so the consequence of that declining college going rate, which has ticked up in the most recent year, but the consequences of that, I would argue, are almost universally negative.
So I guess that leads us to, those are very good questions and responses. And I think that leads us, oh, excuse me, Commissioner Devlin, I'll come back to you in a minute. I didn't see your hand before this. To wondering, well, perhaps lean even more heavily on the link that you make and that you just emphasized to us. I think the heavier you can lean on that with the legislature, just as an educational opportunity, the better. But given the barriers that Commissioner Smith pointed out and the results that you're pointing out, if we were going to design this today, or if we were going to go to the legislature now and recommend certain changes in this program to make it more effective, knowing what we know now, what would be the key things we would change, and should we be doing that? Should we be pursuing that course and making it better rather than assuming that we're going to keep funding the Oregon Opportunity Grant at a much greater rate than this? Or should they be folded together? Or I don't know. How would we rethink this? Juan or Amy, but briefly.
Chair Rowe, I wasn't sure if you were addressing that at us or at your colleagues.
You first. We're going to follow your lead.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I do have thoughts. I think that there is definitely there are resource constraints on the legislature. They're not able to fund everything the way that we would desire solely for post-secondary. I think that there is strong room for looking at the promise sort of squarely in the face and saying, are you trying to support the students who are already going, in which case you're doing it well? Or are you trying to increase and encourage more students to go, in which case that you're not, the promise is neither structured nor resourced to do that work in the same way. I'm not going to go on because I've talked a lot, and invite Juan to speak because I know he has other thoughts. I will, before I pass the mic, I will say how much I would encourage and support the point he made in the last presentation about financial aid for certificate programs.
Thank you, Commissioner Rowe. Great question, and it is somewhat of a hot seat for us because it's a policy threshold. It's a key decision, if you will, at the end of the road, because we, and you know this very well, we proposed reforms to the Oregon Promise for several years, and we were successful in 2022 in achieving some of the reforms that we had recommended. Not all of the reforms that we have recommended for the Oregon Promise. So, in order to improve the Oregon Promise output, if you will, the outcome, so that its batting average could be more OOG-like, there are still some remaining reforms that could be pursued, but they cost money. So this is the other thing to be cognizant of, and this is where in the past, when we attempted through the legislative process, we didn't succeed with everything, or we didn't succeed at all in some years because of the cost. So, and I'll mention some of them very briefly. We pursued lowering the GPA to 2.0, but the ultimate step would be to eliminate the GPA requirement, to inspire those who may not see themselves as college-going students to go on to college. Because think this program started with access to those who are already in a college-going track with a 2.45 or higher GPA. So if we want to do that, let's reduce the GPA. Now, the OOG already does that. The OOG does not discriminate based on GPA. It does not look at your GPA. Doesn't look like high school history. The other thing that we have recommended, and this costs money, is to stop accounting for prior credits. So if students earn credits while in high school, primarily many of them do, that are community college credits. So if we don't account for those, it would allow students to further utilize the maximum credit limit in the promise. And with that, an additional reform would be to stop accounting for credits altogether and shift to accounting for terms the way we do with the Oregon Opportunity Grant. Again, another step to make it more Opportunity Grant-like, where we would account for up to, say, 2 years of full-time enrollment for a window. So the a third component, and this is a component that would, and this is my personal opinion, so it's not agency policy, by the way, this is my personal opinion, is that by allowing students to use their Oregon Promise Award at any Oregon Opportunity Grant eligible institution, public universities, private, nonprofit Oregon-based institutions, and of course our community colleges, that would incentivize the college growing rate in a significant way. So that is a different kind of lever. Now, all those levers have a cost. Another reform would be to have a bit more flexibility of students starting and stopping with the Oregon Promise. So a bit more Oregon Opportunity Grant-like, where students can start and stop at different times and still have their eligibility available for future years. All those things cost money. One essential question here that I believe is probably the most important question is, should we, as a state, have the expectation and commit to an entitlement for our recent high school and GED recipients to, at the very least, a 2-year after high school coverage of tuition? And given that essential question, then it's at what degree do we need to fund the initiative and have it to a level where students can access it in a flexible way, and that students can enroll at institutions within the state of Oregon flexibly according to their needs, their career objectives, whether it's a certificate program, an associate's degree, or a bachelor's degree. That I think is the essential question here for programs like this, where you've seen success, and my colleague referenced it is in those states or in those communities, because sometimes it's cities, who have a significant commitment of an endowment of funds, set aside funds that do not set any SAI caps, fiscal caps, or enrollment caps for the recipients into these programs. Thank you.
Well, I guess the question for us, or a question for us, is yes, given all of those potential reforms that you mentioned that cost money, and knowing that any package of those would be too much, how should we look at accepting this report, and what message accompanying the report would you give the legislature? And is there anything as a commission we can do that would help put context around this, or get us on a path as a state to reforming it and making it better? I mean, it seems insufficient to say, okay, we accept this report, given all of the outcomes that are not what we want. Is there anything as a commission we can do, or you can do as presenters of the report to the legislature?
Chair Rowe, I can, in the report, include the commission's reservations, given the findings about the program's current structure. That's certainly well within what I could add to the report.
Would that be potentially helpful?
Are you asking me, or are you asking
Yes, I'm asking
your colleagues?
you.
I think it would. I think one of the things that is challenging about the promise is that, as I said, it strives to do multiple things. It is the only program in the state that can support middle-class families who, although the opportunity grant is getting there, honestly, with its increased eligibility, but who may not have that ESC. That said, if its primary goal is not that, if its primary goal is to increase college going, and that is your primary goal for the program, it is certainly, I can certainly clarify that that goal should be leading and is not being met by the current structure. All of that is in the report, but I think it is helpful for me to hear your priorities around this program.
Well, I think, speaking absolutely for myself, when this program first started, and I wasn't even a part of HECC, the expectation was that it was going to, for as a member of the public, my expectation was that, gosh, it was going to go to essentially everybody, and it would definitely open the gates of opportunity for people who didn't have it, and that they could have that expectation. Now, even if they have that expectation, they're running into the actual rules in real life, and oh no, you may not qualify, or if you've stayed out more than 6 months, or if you went to university and then dropped out and wanted to go to community college, I mean, or for all kinds of reasons. But anyway, I'm not trying to get us quite to conclusion. A couple more questions, then we're going to decide how to handle this. Commissioner Smith and Commissioner Devlin, did you still have a question?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. Commissioner Devlin, then Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the question I would have is, I'll reflect upon the debate that I know occurs in the legislature. When this was first proposed and when it was actually first instituted, obviously everybody that was like in the hierarchy of higher education that I can think of was opposed to the program because it wasn't based on need. And and that still exists actually in terms of both that hierarchy and also in terms of the legislature, because some people oppose it because it's not based on need. Those are countered by the people that are emphatically supporters of the program because it's one of those few things that are available to middle class students. And it's also one of the things that they've always thought of as a way to get people into college, even though your underlying findings find that it doesn't probably improve the overall quantity. It may actually impact individual students on whether they attend, but it doesn't improve the overall quantity. That debate seems to basically have occurred every session, and I expect it to reoccur. How it's usually settled is the people that want to keep the program, keep the program. The people that want it need-based manage to limit what the financial impact of it is so that more money can be put into the opportunity grant or put into 100 different other things that they would like the money to be put into. So, I mean, that's the only reason I'm stating all that is if you were to comment how the commission discussed this, I think you would find some of that same diversity in opinion about the program that you see in the legislature, because there's some people here that are supportive, some people that think it should be put in the Oregon Opportunity Grant, some people that believe it should be expanded in some other areas to make it more meet its perhaps original intent, which might be far more costly. And then, Madam Chair, I just have one thing because I wanted to get this in. And let me see, let's find it. On your table B2, do I have a page number here? Page 30. I just wanted to point out what is an obvious typo to you that you probably don't want going in the document to the legislature. I don't think anybody ever see it, but on Chemeketa, it has an increased amount of total dollars, but it goes from 1,713 students to 114 students. So it goes to about $38,000 per student there. And I understand that's probably just a typo and just a transfer, but I think you would want to get that corrected. Madam Chair, and that's the end of my comments.
Commissioner Devlin, I apologize, Chair Rowe.
No, go ahead.
Commissioner Devlin, thank you sincerely for your observation of that obvious typo. A number has been left off that should be in the thousands. So yes, we will absolutely get that corrected. Much appreciated. And to your earlier comments about the debate in the legislature, yes, we hear this. I have heard this. Just to affirm what you're saying, this range of responses when I have presented Oregon Promise findings to subcommittees or committees. It will be interesting to hear if we what we hear on Monday when Juan and I are scheduled to share some of these findings again. With more years underway since the promise began, with the in the analysis, I think some of the findings get sort of clearer. I don't know that necessarily always moves hearts and minds, especially with the confounding factors of the pandemic. But I'll be keen to hear the questions that we get on Monday.
Okay, commissioners, I've now let this go on long enough that we're going to be behind schedule. So I think what I'd like to do now, if it's okay, is to get your sense of, do we send just a straight motion for approval? And obviously Amy and Juan can use their own judgment on how they need to weigh the report or reflect our conversation. That would be the cleanest thing to do. And I guess I'm wondering if that's the will of the commission or if you want to say anything else beyond the approval. Anybody? Well, then I will take a motion. Or Commissioner Smith, are y'all ready for me to have a motion and vote on this?
I just was going to make a comment that Dr. Cox already pretty much addressed, which is, and now I understand, thanks to Commissioner Devlin, a little bit about the diversity of opinion in the legislature. And so I can see the complication, like being really clear about stating what the goals of the program are, you know, given all the different goals. But having those being very clear up front, and then maybe at the end, recommendations on actually like how to achieve the goals of the program would be more effective, maybe in communication with the legislature. But that's all I have to say about
that's a good organizational point, and Commissioner Devlin, thank you for that background. So what she's saying is if you can rearrange the report a bit so that that's clear.
Yes, we can clarify that at the front and back end. Yes.
Thank you. Especially at the back end, because it's like, oh, what to do. Okay, right. Motion to approve this report as it will be amended.
Madam Chair, I move it as it will be amended.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Raise your hand. Thank you. And thank you both very much for the work and the analysis and the care that has gone into this, and for your ability to answer our questions.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, these are important pieces of work. Now we are going to item 9.3, which is the Open Education Resources Report.
Good morning, Chair Rowe.
Good morning, Shaylee.
Hi, Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Heyman, and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Shali Hodson, and I'm a policy advisor in the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. And while Amy pulls up her slides, I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction to this topic. In my role, I have the great pleasure of working with Amy Hoffer at Lynn Benton Community College, and Amy provides leadership and support to institutions that are expanding the availability of open educational resources in our state. And you've seen us multiple times with multiple different reports. The report that Amy is presenting today is the biennial legislative report, and we do this every 2 years, and provides an update on the requirements of the statute that governs this work. So, Amy, are you with us?
She is.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could not get Teams to cooperate. I have a newish laptop. So Shelley, if you don't mind pulling up the slides, and in the meantime, I'll introduce myself. I'm Amy Hoffer, Statewide Open Education Program Director with Open Oregon Educational Resources. And I know these are long meetings, so let me just give you my top line takeaway. And this is, thank you so much, Shelley. This is the next slide. Yeah. So the top line is that the statewide OER program is executing on what the HECC has charged us with doing, which is increasing the use of OER and tracking the student savings that result. And the report shows the current status of Oregon's OER program, a calculation of student savings, and areas for future investment. So let's get started and go on to the next slide. And actually you can advance to Open Oregon Educational Resources is the name of our statewide OER program. We are aligned with the HECC strategic goal for affordability, and we promote textbook affordability for community college and university students and facilitate widespread adoption of open, low-cost, high-quality materials. You can visit the openoregon.org website for more information showcasing what's happening across the state. Let's go to the next slide. There are 3 general categories of things that we do. The first is that Oregon is a national leader in open education because we have such an awesome community of practice here. And we have a point person at all 24 public institutions who facilitates communication. We have a statewide steering committee that has been running for 10 years. We meet twice a year, and a few examples of what we're working on this biennium. We're working closely with the Orbis Cascade Alliance, our regional library consortium, to continue our statewide conversation about student-centered course material procurement models. We are supporting university point people to include OER activities in promotion and tenure processes. And we are hosting a regular discussion group for folks at institutions that also have local OER funding to spend in addition to the statewide resources. We have also informal opportunities to participate. We have a monthly drop-in meeting for our point people. We have a listserv, we have a weekly digest newsletter, so there is a lot going on here. Let's go to the next slide and I'll tell you a little bit about our regular professional development opportunities. This is for faculty and others to learn about OER and receive stipends to participate and start implementing in their courses. So we regularly offer review workshops where faculty can write an in-depth peer review of an open educational resource that they might adopt in their course for a small stipend. We're also currently running one of our equity and open education faculty cohorts, and a similar cohort for teaching and learning support staff is coming up. This was developed by Jen Claudini at Portland Community College, and now it's offered statewide. And please save the date. Our statewide OER symposium is coming up on May 2nd, and all are welcome to join us. If you only have 1 hour that day, please come to the 2 o'clock hour. I'll be giving a statewide update and doing our champion awards, which is such a fun part of the symposium. So lots going on. All of that's on our calendar page, and let's do our next slide, please. So we also offer policy support to implement our legislative requirements and assess their impacts. We have House Bill 2871 that requires the no cost and low cost schedule designation. I'll talk about the impact in just a minute. We have from 2213, the textbook affordability plan requirement. We have 18 institutions that have submitted those. And House Bill 2919 set a target for on-time course materials adoption reporting, and you received the first report on that last spring. So let's go on, and I'll start talking about calculating student savings with the caveat that I always ask for data in spring of odd-numbered years so that I can capture all 8 quarters of the biennium. So we're very solid on data up through 2023, and we're very partial on data from the current biennium. But let's go on, and I'll tell you about some direct savings impacts. These numbers are just a little different from what's in your packet because I started checking in with our grantees last week, and I updated the numbers on the slide after Guthrie had the slide deck. So this is what I would call direct savings is we're spending program dollars and students are saving money as a result of our activities. So the current grant cohort for this biennium is supporting 25 projects at 15 institutions. We're spending about $260,000. And to date, 4,600 students, these are not the updated slides. I didn't share them with anybody. Hold on a second while I grab those numbers because it's pretty fun to look at them. So I'm going to tell you verbally that 6,500 students have saved over $1 million in the current biennium. So this is a big difference from our fall check-in, which is the data that you're seeing here. And our estimated student savings per program dollar spent is almost $4 now. And assessment of past OER grant cohorts shows that savings from the use of OER compound over time as more students take those redesigned courses. So if we go on to the next slide, what I'm highlighting here is the difference between the current cohort savings to date and what I was able to show in 2023 that about $24 million had been saved as a result of the spending that we did in our program. And that return is about $11 in student savings per program dollar spent. So it does get really exciting as the numbers get really big. And then I have one more slide here, Shelley, just to show the estimated savings per program dollar spent. These dollars have a ripple effect forward in time because we're spending the money once and they're continuing to incur student savings as we go forward. People keep teaching with the OER or they persuade their colleagues to also switch, right? Like it is a really high impact way to spend state funds. And one of the highest impact things we do is these OER review workshops that I mentioned a minute ago. In terms of that ratio of program dollars spent to student savings, it really is the highest impact thing that we do by that measure, with over $50 in student savings per program dollar spent. So I also want to talk about our indirect impact. So since 2015, when the state started putting money towards textbook affordability, We've seen a lot of movement all over the state that I don't directly take credit for, but I do report on it because it has to do with state policy. So I've got this exclamation point here because the impact of the schedule designation is really, really big. It represents a really big potential for impact on student costs. And in the previous biennium, we had 20 institutions reporting student savings or cost avoidance of $70 million. And at those institutions, almost 30% of courses offered had the designation of no cost or low cost. And what I have is data from 6 years. And cumulatively, that represents 1.8 million students in 100,000 sections saving $150 million or avoiding spending $150 million. So these numbers are very big. And again, I will have the data on that after spring term. So, summer and fall is when I'll be able to report out on the current biennium. So let's go on. I have more information about the impact of the schedule designation. I co-authored a first of its kind research study with Jennifer Landtrip at Pacific University and Shauna McNulty at Umpqua Community College. And we were looking at whether the no cost and low cost schedule designation has an impact on student enrollment behavior. Our data showed yes, students are voting with their feet to find lower cost courses, and we are potentially helping historically underserved students lower the cost of attendance. So this is really exciting. It finally was published in a journal. That process takes a long time, as you all know. So that is exciting news for us. And then I just want to go into my final section here, which is the areas for future investment. And let's go to the next slide. So it's always really boring. It's always the same. Time and money are the biggest barriers to OER adoption. To address these barriers, I'm continuing to advocate a program funding increase. We've been at the same continuing service level since 2019, and there's just a lot more exciting work that we would like to do with a program funding increase. It's also aligned with the J to She Affordability Work Group recommendation that was sort of left unfinished from 2023. It's part of the Student Basic Needs and Workforce Stabilization Act that you heard Kyle mention earlier, which is House Bill 3182 and 3183. And this package includes support for benefits navigators, student housing, and textbook affordability, because we know that students are often having to choose between buying a textbook or buying food, right? Like these are very, very connected needs. And I need to also put an asterisk that even though the HECC is broadly supportive of the OER program, the funding request that I'm presenting to you is mine, not theirs, as this is not included in the governor's recommended budget. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the impact of what would happen with this program funding increase from the student perspective. So the straight line impact, we've talked about these direct impacts where there is student savings with just a straight line arrow drawn. We offer awards and stipends for faculty to adopt, adapt, or create openly licensed course materials. They're available online at no cost or in print at low cost, and students directly see the savings. There's also what I would call a squiggly line impact. These are really large scale projects, ensuring that materials are not just affordable, but also high quality. And what I mean by high quality is they're relevant, aligned with course outcomes, accessible, and designed with an equity lens. So courses that are going through the common course numbering process are a huge opportunity for us because we have statewide agreed upon course outcomes, and we can design open educational resources with an equity lens that are exactly tailored to those statewide course outcomes. So this is exactly the kind of work that I would really like to do with a program funding increase. Another example would be translating OER into languages other than English. And with these really big projects, like students are not going to see an immediate effect. They are big projects that take a long time and a lot of resources, but it is a really important impact that we can have. And then last, for dotted line impact, it's not going to have as much of a direct feeling of cause and effect from the student perspective. But I'm still feeling like it's really important for our program to be involved. So things like designing course materials with an equity lens, we've shown through our research that this can affect the student sense of belonging and therefore retention, right? So it is important to do, but students aren't necessarily going to feel it in their wallet right away, right? Or thinking about student-centered course material procurement models and increasing cost transparency for course materials. All of that is behind the scenes activity that we are very involved in. It's sort of infrastructure work that we're doing. The last slide has my email address, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for that. That is good news. And just before I open to questions, like to say when Commissioner Hayman and I were visiting the last year, visiting all colleges and universities, especially at community colleges, most of them brought it up. And when I visited a library or asked about it, they were universal in their praise and stating profoundly the need for it, for this program. So thank you for all you are doing. Questions, Commissioner Middleton?
Thank you, Chair Rowe. And I want to thank Amy for this report and for your work with OER. I will echo Chair Rowe's statements that OER resources are absolutely very valuable at community colleges, I know, at Rogue, and I've heard that from colleagues throughout the state. We've adopted at Rogue several OER textbooks in many disciplines. I was interested in hearing a bit more about some of the other work that you suggested there at the end of your report, particularly translating textbooks into other languages. That would be, I think, really helpful at the community colleges, especially Hispanic serving institutions, HSIs. And the other thing that some faculty see as an obstacle to adopting an OER is the lack of additional resources that come with the textbook to support that faculty member adopting it. Especially things like problems that can be uploaded easily into Blackboard to create assignments and assessments and different things like that, projects that are prepared to support the you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, can you just elaborate a little bit more on that work? Because I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. So we did our first translation project during the pandemic. We got some governor's emergency relief funding through the HECC to do a pilot. And I have a show and tell right here. So this is Blueprint for Success. It's a college success textbook by Dave Dillon in California. It's a remix of sort of the best of college success textbooks. He included 2 authors from Lane Community College. So there's already an Oregon connection. And we used that gear funding to make an Oregon version of the book and then translate it into Spanish. And this was a pilot. It was our first go round. And we're really eager to take what we learned from that and apply it going forward to other translation projects. I've heard that from other folks that there is a need. And what we lack now is funding to support it. So I really appreciate your support for that idea of doing more translation of open educational resources. Regarding the ancillaries, this is a really big topic right now. One of the things that we've done, we have, if you go to the openoregon.org website, we have a resources page where we capture known adoptions across the state. There's over 1,000 entries on that page. So I do not recommend browsing. There's a search bar at the top and there's some drop downs. There's also a checkbox where you can search only for courses where we know that there are ancillaries available. And also on that page, folks have opted in to include their name and email address, which means it's okay to contact them about their course and their adoption and ask them if they can share their quiz questions or how did it go or whatever it may be. So I really see that page as a way to find your colleagues and see how other people at the college down the road are teaching the course with no cost or low cost materials. We are seeing more and more ancillary development like OpenStax out of Rice University. They're kind of the gold standard of open textbook publishing, and they do partner with low-cost homework platforms. They have committed to like remain in a competitive environment. They're not going to make an exclusive deal with any platform, which means they'll keep having to compete to keep their costs low. But I do think that we have, I'm editorializing a bit here, but there is a bit of an issue with assigning homework platforms. Students often pay for access to the learning management system through technology fees, and then they're being asked to pay again to do their homework. And I really think that this comes down to a labor issue where we have a lot of part-time faculty who are not paid to develop the course, but only to teach it. So this is sort of like a bigger issue that's beyond my pay grade, but when you look at course materials, you often like pull one thread and then the whole sweater comes with it. So that's maybe more of an answer than you were expecting, but yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Hayman.
Just a quick comment. Amy, thank you so much for your presentation. Always have appreciated your work and glad to see the kind of success we're having in that area. I just want to note that we as a commission spend an awful lot of time talking about how we're going to help students pay for the cost of education. This is one of the few programs that actually addresses the cost of education, and a great opportunity here to have an impact our students. I also want to recognize that this coursework, because it is based on broadly agreed upon learning outcomes, it also lends, I think, support for the ability for courses credits earned to move between institutions, because we recognize the coursework from institution to institution. So it's kind of a byproduct that I value very much. So thank you.
Good point. Thank you. Commissioner Simnett, and then we'll move to a vote.
Thank you, Amy, for the report, and I think I thank you every time you are here before us. I think the OER program is one of it's a clear success and makes a clear difference for students, and one in which that I really appreciate the way that faculty are involved and they are collaborators and they are supported with this. That's I think a real gold standard for us to look at. I also really appreciate that this provides the designation provides students information so students can make informed choices. I am interested in thinking about or knowing more about if you've looked at if any of the courses that now have common course numbering across institutions, if there's like a way to link the OERs with those particular courses or to make those more visible to faculty who are teaching those courses, since, as Commissioner Hayman noted, those courses have shared learning outcomes.
Yeah, thank you for your comments and for that question. I have chatted with some HECC staffers about a couple of ways that the statewide OER program could get more involved in CCN even without a program funding increase. It would be very simple for me to make dynamic links that show existing adoptions of CCN courses, by using the Open Oregon Resources page adoption tracker. So that's information that can be very easily shared. It's very quick to do, and that can be easily provided. And I've also, when we were sort of at the turn of the 2023, end of the biennium there, I started looking into the COM courses that had been, designated for the Z. and did a little bit of preliminary research. So, you know, there's certain disciplines where it's like, okay, who's the obvious coalition of the willing here, where are there really good OER that would be a great starting point. And, you know, I'm always very happy to come to any meeting and talk about OER. As you all know, I'll talk about this stuff all day. So I'm happy to attend any of those meetings of people that are, you know, looking at curriculum now and thinking about recommended course materials or, you know, recommended projects for development.
Good. Thank you very much for this report and for the work. Commissioners, we need to accept this report to be, it's an action item to be forwarded. So can we have a motion, please?
Move to accept.
Thank you. And the second? I think we got it. Okay. Got it. Thank you, Commissioner Middleton. All in favor, indicate by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, commissioners, since I let us get behind, we get punished by going to lunch late. So I would like to, even though it's lunchtime on the schedule, it's not lunchtime for us yet. I would like to get the public university reports done first, and Veronica Dijon is with us. Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Veronica.
Thank you, and good afternoon, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Veronica Dijon, and I'm the Director for Academic Policy and Authorization. And before you, we have today the university evaluations, the two-page summaries that anticipate the university evaluations. And as you may recall, the Commission is required to submit these to the legislature for each institution, each of the public universities, and we do that on an every other year schedule. As part of the process, the Commission may make recommendations regarding a university's ability to